what's frustrating to me is when politicians say this is not something that comes up on the doorstep. You only need to dig just beneath the surface to have conversations with people that are about this power and agency. You saw that over Brexit, where the vast majority of people who voted for Brexit said their major reason was they wanted British laws to be made in Britain. And that's a conversation about constitutional sovereignty, right?
Why is it so hard to discuss electoral reform? And what would changing the voting system actually mean?
Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this.
Are you excited about another election?
No. No.
In this film, we hear from Frances Foley from Compass, who lays out her case for reform and warns how Firstpastthepost leaves people feeling frustrated and disenfranchised.
People have been campaigning to change the voting system for a really long time. The Electoral Reform Society was set up in 1984, I think. We're still not there. A lot of people can still see this as a really niche, fringe issue. But I think when you look at the fact that to get any right to be heard, most politicians have to start off by saying politics is broken. You heard Rishi Sunak say last week, that you've seen 30 years of vested interest standing in the way of change, and you've seen this widespread, undeniable sense that Westminster's not working as it should. I think that's really instructive for the left and people who are interested in democratic reform, because it shows that it's something that they understand that the wider public are sensing and experiencing in their day-to-day lives. And increasingly people are making the link between material conditions of the country and structural obstacles standing in the way of that. And I think the reason that we've been supporting PR for such a long time comes down to sort of two main things. Of course, there's a principle behind it, which is that we don't get social justice or climate justice or any other kind of justice really without democratic justice. And of course, this country, you have millions of people, 70% of votes don't count, so millions of people who turn up and do their duty every time for representatives of systems, and they don't see anything really changing, and that's because of these huge blockages of Firstpastthepost. It also means that the smaller parties, who could be healthy competition to a party like Labour, who frankly could do sometimes with a bit of a shift in the right direction on certain things, never get a look in. You had at the last election 865,000 votes for the Greens, but they got one MP. And even if you look at the right of politics, I don't think it was unusual or a coincidence that in 2015 you had sort of 4.5 million votes for UKIP, and then the year after you had the referendum, and a lot of those people were being disenfranchised, as well they should, because they only got one MP as well. So it doesn't work for most other parties apart from these two monolithic parties who really benefit more than they should from this electoral system. And then the other side of it is just the way that I think PR at this particular moment in time for the UK in 2023 could really be the tip of the spear for other democratic reforms that we want to see. The biggest thing that's holding back the UK, I think, in terms of engagement and participation in politics is that people don't see that anything changes. We have a system that's hundreds of years in the making that's essentially ossified, and ossified in a way to keep most people out of it, but also really perniciously to make people feel that nothing will ever change. So it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter who you vote for, nothing is going to change. And I see PR as just a really useful kind of shaking up of that really stuck, stagnant politics. So people look at it and say, hang on, something changed here. That means it's worth me investing my time and my energy in whatever new things come out of that. And finally, to just say, I think we don't actually know the impact that PR would have for progressives in the UK, but I think it would open up that space that is really, really lacking. I think one of the missing pieces of the interpretation about why we need PR is that if you look to what Keir Starmer's doing right now, people are very critical of his small target strategy, carrying them in vase, don't say anything. But actually that's really going with the grain of the electoral logic of Firstpastthepost. So it really rewards doing stuff on the margins, it really rewards coming to the centre to kind of win over small groups of people. And don't forget, politicians can ignore the vast majority of people in order to get elected just by working in these small marginal areas. And so I think what we've got to understand as the left is that we need more space, we need more competition, and we need that sense of agency that is absolutely requisite for kind of any sort of transformation of the democratic and political space we want to see.
I want to thank the people of this country for turning out to vote in a December election that we didn't want to call, but which I think has turned out to be a historic.
Could you explain, in kind of what the mechanics are of the Firstpastthepost in simple terms, just kind of briefly, that makes it kind of undemocratic?
Yeah, so essentially Firstpastthepost rewards a kind of winner-takes-all approach. So in each constituency, you'll have people competing for these votes, they'll stand for election. But in most of these seats, because of the way that power is sort of concentrated over time, you'll have a lot of people turning up who will vote for a different candidate, but the candidate who gets the most votes in that constituency gets over the line. It doesn't matter if they have actually a minority of the vote, in lots of cases that they do. And this leads to things like what we call at Compass progressive tragedies. So that's seats in which the combined progressive vote is greater than the vote for the Tories, say, but the Tories, because the progressives are divided and fragmented, come through the middle and take the seat. So that means that most people who voted in that constituency voted for progressive parties, and there I'm sort of roughly defining centre and left of parties. So in England that would be Lib Dems, Labour and Greens. We would include Scotland, SNP, and we would include Plaid Cymru. But that does mean that in most cases, it really is to the benefit of both incumbent parties who also have vested interests, long histories of power, networks, abilities to access the media. And it also means that people see this mismatch between what they have voted for and what they actually get. And a lot of people sort of don't really make that connection in their head. So they think, oh, well, it's a fair fight, it's a fair competition. But in actual fact, First Past the Post is this hugely majoritarian system which really rewards, once again, these like weird margins. So you work at these margins and what you get is disproportionate to the effort that you've put in. And I think that is essentially bad for democracy. I think you should have to work for your vote, and I think people should be competing for people to, give them their support in a representative system. But First Past the Post, you won't often hear that, but actually it's anti-competition is basically what it is. It stifles any innovation or experimentation at the local level, and this basically means that all other parties apart from Labour and the Tories don't get a look in and don't get as much representation as they should.
How can we have these conversations in a way that is engaging to everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I would say a couple of things about that. So firstly, I think people, if they engage with politics at all, understand that things are not working, that there's a feedback loop that is broken between our representatives and the broader public. And that you can see that also really materially in terms of what's happened to things like inequality in this country, the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis. These are huge, big challenges that the vast majority of the public really care about. And they can see that nothing is being done on these, or not nothing, but not as much as it should. The sort of short-termism in politics kind of bakes in this really competitive approach, but also in a way that leaves most people cold. So I would say that what's frustrating to me is when politicians say this is not something that comes up on the doorstep. You only need to dig just beneath the surface to have conversations with people that are about this power and agency. You saw that over Brexit, where the vast majority of people who voted for Brexit said their major reason was they wanted British laws to be made in Britain. And that's a conversation about constitutional sovereignty, right? And people will say, in a very patronising way, I think a lot of instances that people didn't know what they were voting for. I think a lot of people really felt there was this sense of being able to kind of kick it to the elite, and I think that's where we need to start the conversation on the left, with a lot of people who feel like completely disenfranchised. And so if you start there and say, in a democracy, people should have some sense of agency and power, they should be enfranchised. This goes beyond the ballot box, and it goes into workplaces, it goes into like big constitutional decisions like citizen assemblies, that we could unlock spaces for people to do that. I think what's really important is that people don't just take the sort of surface level of what people are saying about things like housing or the NHS. These are all products of a latent system which is broken. And I think people really do want to talk about that. I facilitated citizen assemblies before, and when you sit in those spaces and give people the opportunity and actually ask them what they really think, say to people, what do you think about this issue now that you've heard from a bunch of different people, a bunch of different testimonies, witness statements. And then beyond that, and this is where I'm really passionate about it, because I always say to people, citizen assemblies are not about just canvassing views. They're not about consulting people. They're asking people to take a decision and step into their own power. And that's where I see innovations like citizen assemblies sitting alongside PR. So it's essentially bringing more people into the decision-making process. It's saying, you have expertise, you have experience, and you have the ability to make change. And that is the most important thing. However, you can up people's feelings of agencies. Because the final thing I'll say is people in proportional systems, the turnout is always higher. There's more activism at the kind of local level and on the party level, because people, can go and canvass for the Green Party and expect to get some representatives in Parliament, rather than, always turning up and just expecting to get nothing. And also people are more open to things like innovation and experimentation, because we're not in this really narrow and shallow system, which is First Past the Post, where the only thing that matters is gaining control of Westminster so you can gain control of the country, even though we know that that's not really how politics works.
Mm-hmm.